you can remove yourself from a bad situation and it will follow you if you don't know how to truly leave internally. So even though I distanced myself from my family and I intellectually knew that all of this was a lie, the fear was still there. The fear was still driving the decisions. The I have to hide was still driving what I chose to do with my life. And the way that I really left is understanding the neuroscience principles of how to not just physically leave a bad situation, but how to fully deprogram, how to not let your past pollute your present.
Lydia, welcome to the Point of Impact. I'm so glad you're here.
It's so great to be here. I'm excited about our conversation.
Well, I tell you what, so am I. You've got a very interesting, to say the least, story, and I can't wait to get into it. It's amazing, it's tragic, and it's also absolutely inspiring what you've done with your life and for others. So, where do we dig in? I don't even know.
Well, I think a great principle to look at is that the scariest, hardest, most wild part of the story oftentimes becomes the best part of the story when you're on the other side of it in freedom and triumph, and when there's a happy ending to the story. So I think wherever we start is great because it's nice to know that we can celebrate because we're on the other side of it. And that's what hope is.
Well, that's the point of impact. Is quite often we have that hero's journey, right? We've got to go through the gauntlet. We've got to face our trials, slay the dragon, maybe sometimes multiple dragons, and sometimes we have many different journeys or obstacles along the way, but in the end, that hero has to come full circle. And part of that is realizing what they've learned along the way and going back to tell the tale and teach others and help them on their path. So tell you what, why don't we start back with the childhood and a less than orthodox religious experience?
Yes, there was layers of that, but happy to start at the beginning. So I grew up in very terrifying circumstances. I was scared every day of my life as a child because what I had been told is that there is a group of Satan worshipers that is constantly chasing us, that if they ever find us, they will instantly kill you and everyone that you love, your whole family. We were always in hiding. We would move in the middle of the night. We would always be told, my brother and I, to just be afraid, be afraid. The fear is what is going to keep you safe. And we had been told that we had already been hurt, that these Satan worshipers had broken our spine, that I had had needles drilled into my eyes, that I had had all of this horrible ritualistic satanic abuse that I had been the victim of, and that I'd probably just be broken for the rest of my life, physically, mentally, that I had tracking devices in my body. So I grew up with an absolutely terrifying every day. And what was really wired into my nervous system was be as afraid as possible, hide as much as possible, don't be seen. And I grew up in a cult that the cult leader was my grandmother, and she created a cult within the Mormon church. And that was what I knew until I was an adult and had a child of my own. So that our stories are very powerful and our stories drive how we feel every day.
That's so many things there. And I know we only have so much time because there's so much more to the story, but we could do such a deep dive on just the cult faction here. But okay, first, I believe you've told the story before where you when you were a young girl, you told your mom that you had your back pain, and she told you all that stuff. And what do you answer to that? Is that Motrin or exorcism?
Yeah, great question. And interestingly enough, so my grandmother was the cult leader, and then my mother was what I call the cult liar. Like, she's the one who made up all these stories. So her story was she was getting revelations from God that was telling her, God was telling her all of the way that the world worked and about these Satan worshipers. And so she also had an answer to everything. So I would say, I have back pain. And she would say, that's because the Satan worshipers broke your spine over and over. And I would cry and be scared and, oftentimes cry myself to sleep that night, finding out this new explicit information. But then she had the answer. So if I just did everything perfectly, if I said my prayers, if I perfectly followed everything that she said, there was a chance that God would keep me safe. And so it always looped back into, you'll be okay if you're perfectly obedient. You'll be okay if you do everything that I say, everything that the Mormon church says. Always monitor your thoughts and make sure that you're being perfect all the time. So she had solutions like that. And she also had solutions like when I was a teenager and wanted to whiten my teeth. She said God told her that I should just rinse with hydrogen peroxide multiple times a day. And then my teeth started wearing away. Like, I could rub my teeth with my fingernail and my teeth were coming apart. And then God told her that now was time to stop. So she always knew the answer with 100% certainty, with the authority of God. Like, that was my relationship with my mother.
Was that, what was the impetus there? Did your grandmother and your mother actually believe this? Was this just a way to control you? I don't understand, because I'm thinking of my own three boys who are all young, and that's evil. That's criminal. I mean, and my heart breaks to think of a child having to go through this torture, mental and physical. But these are your mother. That's your number one connection to this whole world. And to be doing this to you and your brother, was this what she believed was love, or was this just because it was the presets, that was the tenet of the religion?
Great question. And this is the puzzle of my past. There isn't really a clear way to know, and I'll share what I've put together or what I think so far. And I think it's an important principle to look at. Healing is a solo, like, with community, of course, but like, we can heal from our past even if we don't fully understand it. And oftentimes when we disconnect with our bodies and we're up in our head and we get very intellectual about things, we think, well, I need to understand all the information and then I can heal. And what's wonderful is you don't need all the information, that you can have full healing, even if there's a lot of mystery in the past. But this is what I have put together so far. So I think the most compassionate view to look at it through is that there was probably some big mental illness that my mother was dealing with. I do think that, at least when I was young, she fully believed these things. She still lives her life in a way where she does believe these things. I think that my grandmother, who was the cult leader, found a lot of social benefit from what was happening. So one way that I knew what had happened to me is that my grandmother would sit me down next to her, and she would call someone on the phone, a friend in the Mormon church, and she would tell them in explicit detail all the horrible things that had happened to me, what the Satan worshipers had done. And then she would ask them to, what's called fasting in the Mormon church, to go without food or water as a strong prayer to keep us from being kidnapped by the Satan worshipers. And then she would call the next person and the next person. So I would hear this sometimes for hours at a time, over and over and over. And my grandmother was building this huge network of people. She was very charismatic. She was a rodeo queen, bride of the year. And what happened is that she would tell these stories. And I would, for instance, go to church and people would see me, tears would fill in their eyes because they knew how much we'd been hurt. And then they would look to my grandmother and say things like, "You've saved these grandchildren. You are literally like our Savior, Jesus Christ, to give up your life to keep them safe. How do you do it? She was so praised. She was so popular. Like, people just loved her for this story that she created. So I think for my grandmother, there was a lot of social praise that she loved.
That's it's like a religious version of factitious disorder or Munchausen by proxy. Yeah, they're telling these stories to get attention. Wow. When was it that you realized that this wasn't normal?
It was as an adult. It was when I had a child of my own. And looking back, it feels a bit embarrassing that I didn't realize that these were all lies. And what happens is that when we are in an echo chamber and we don't have anyone doubting our story, and when we're told to keep things secret, there isn't a lot to challenge it. So what happened is that as an adult, I wanted to know the truth for myself. That became very important to me, that I didn't just believe someone else's stories. I believed what they told me, but I wanted to see the evidence. And I was told that there was so much evidence, that there were boxes and boxes of documented, like, medical reports of all the horrible things that had happened to me. And so as an adult, I asked to see those for myself. And I was completely shut down. My grandmother, my mother said, "No way. You're not going to see those. It'll probably trigger your brain. You'll be under the power of Satan. Like, there's no way." So, Aaron, I did the first sneaky thing in my entire life. And I went and I looked at these boxes of, in quotes, evidence for myself. And there were boxes and boxes, but not with evidence inside. It was just like letters that my dad had written wanting to see his kids. It was all this documentation of the divorce, but nothing about any abuse. And then I found this big, thick packet, and it was a training packet for police officers, and how police officers can recognize satanic worship stuff. And I opened this packet, and on the first page, it talked about, well, Satan worshipers do everything opposite from what God wants us to. So instead of baptizing children in water, they baptize them in blood. And I'm like, oh, I was told that I was baptized in blood. Then I turned the page. Every single thing that it listed in this training manual that was nothing about me, everything that was listed in this packet was something that I had been told had specifically happened to me. And it became very clear that this was material that they made up the story from, but there was absolutely nothing that linked reality and what I'd been told to, like, the real story. There was nothing to support that any of this had happened to me. And I realized that there's no way that this can be true.
That's wild. You that reminds me. What did you study in college?
I studied psychology, interestingly enough, and that was another piece of the truth breaking through, because in psychology, you study about false memories, and you study about how even if something didn't happen, when you have a high pressure person, especially in isolation, telling you that you've done something or that something has happened, people tend to start believing it. And I started learning about things historically that had happened, like the satanic panic of the 80s, where it wasn't just me, that so many people believed there was this secret group of Satan worshipers that controlled all sorts of media and children's toys and government and police and this whole conspiracy theory. And that was a really important thing for me to study, especially because I started learning about how the human brain works and how you can have emotions based off of a story that you believe that isn't true. And I started connecting the dots for myself.
Not only that, but the barriers, the things that you were taught, the beliefs that were ingrained in your mind were so strong that even in college, studying this stuff, it didn't didn't immediately occur to you. It's like we block out what doesn't fit our paradigm. And because I always wonder how if you're in a cult and you're being told one thing, but then you are in the outside world, and the outside world is a different shade of truth, how do you reconcile that? But these things that we tell ourselves, the things that we've been told as children, it's very powerful.
Yes, and we're taught to trust the people that we think love us more than anything. Like, why would I question something that my mother, who I thought loved me, would tell me? Why would someone that loved me, lie to me? So it's these sorts of questions that oftentimes just don't come up. We don't challenge the information that comes from people that we love. And especially when you grow up before the internet, you don't really have information that pops up for you or that you can search to find out these sorts of things. I think it's so powerful that now we have so much information that is available to us, because before that, it was very much you only get information from the people that you talk to in real life.
I thought that you'd discovered the police manual in your studies, not in your snooping around in your family's basement. Your mom had used a training manual as a how-to manual. That's wild. So let's continue on, though. You have this realization that your whole world view, your old religious view, your whole family view has been, I guess, tampered with what objective reality really is. How did you deal with that, and how did you move forward?
Yes, first I talked to my family. I told them what I'd done, and I said, GMOS, what I called my grandmother, and my mom. I found all the boxes and there is no evidence. And at first, especially because I've been taught to suppress emotions my whole life, I didn't feel anger or rage at first. I was just confused. And I
Mm-hmm.
really wanted to understand. I said, if you didn't know any of this had happened, why did you tell me this is true? Why did you say there was evidence if there is no evidence? And they completely shut it down. They said, we're not going to talk about it. It'll trigger your brain. We would rather you think that we lied to you than talk about this and lose you to the power of Satan for the rest of time. And they just completely shut it down. So I went first to them. And then I understood that I had been lied to. And I learned one of the most important lessons that has turned into a mission where we've helped over 9,000 people to heal, which is you can remove yourself from a bad situation and it will follow you if you don't know how to truly leave internally. So even though I distanced myself from my family and I intellectually knew that all of this was a lie, the fear was still there. The fear was still driving the decisions. The I have to hide was still driving what I chose to do with my life. And the way that I really left is understanding the neuroscience principles of how to not just physically leave a bad situation, but how to fully deprogram, how to not let your past pollute your present and to really leave that behind. So the first step was coming to my truth. And then I needed to really understand how to heal and to move forward and to not get stuck in a healing cycle for the rest of my life, which a lot of times happens if you've come from a bad situation, is we tend to think of the healing journey as forevermore, and we don't move forward with our purpose and our true light.
Well, how did this manifest itself in other ways? After you'd separated yourself from the cult, from your mother and your grandmother, and that situation, how did it follow you?
So one big piece was the obedience that I've been taught. And I think that a lot of us in the culture we grew up in, especially women, are taught that we need to be obedient and we need to conform to something. And so even though I had left the Mormon church, I had left my family of origin, there was still this visceral pull that I need to follow all the rules and I need to conform. One way that came up was I need to follow all the rules of being a healthy person, and I need to be thinner and follow all the nutrition guidelines. And that turned into an eating disorder. I also wanted to, build my mission and my cause and to be able to reach out, make a social media video, do some sort of training. And my nervous system felt like if people saw me, because I'd been taught to always hide, I felt like it was so terrifying for people to see me, for people to know something about me. So I had my goals of this is what I want to do in life. And then I had all of this programming that was keeping me back from doing the things I knew I needed to do, but the fear was winning out every time. So it came up in the areas of obedience. It came up in fear and not being seen. It came up in not good enough. It came up in imposter syndrome. It's the things that so many of us deal with, but I had an origin story where it came from maybe a little bit of a different place, but those things still followed me when I wanted to improve my life.
How did you meet such an abusive husband?
In the Mormon church. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see how we grow up and we have a concept of love, and we are given that. And oftentimes in a healing journey, we find what love actually is. So I grew up in a cult where the concept of love was, we will keep you safe because we know more than you. Follow us completely. You know nothing. We know everything. Then when I met my to-be husband, he told me that God told him that I loved him and that I was going to marry him. It wasn't a, how do you feel? It was a, I know how you feel better than you do. And you know what that felt like? That felt like love. Oh, you know better than me. Okay. That's exactly how I am meant to be loved, because that's how I grew up. So now I could recognize the red flags, but at the time they didn't show up as red flags. It showed up as, oh, this is someone that probably cares about me because it feels like what I grew up with.
After these messages, we'll be right back. I'd like to thank the sponsor of this episode, Extraordinary Delights, EODfudge.com. Extraordinary Delights is a disabled veteran, family-owned small business making handcrafted fudge and other sweet treats for the chocolate-loving patriots just like you. Go to EODfudge.com and check out some of our delicious flavors like triple threat chocolate with or without walnuts, mint dark chocolate, strawberry and creamy white chocolate, or my personal favorite, American Pick-Me-Up, an all-American version of tiramisu. While you're there, go to the apparel store and check out our awesome t-shirts, polos, and the baddest tactical apron on the market. You see me wear on the TikTok show, Aaron Hale's Cook Without Looking. So, right now, go over to EODfudge.com and pick out some fudge, other sweet treats for that patriot in your life with a sweet tooth. That's EODfudge.com. EODfudge.com. And now, back to the show. I love you, huh? I must have gotten left off that distro list for that memo. Anyways, yep. That's wild. So, how long are you married to this man?
Almost a decade.
Oh my goodness. And then also dealing with the eating disorder at the same time? Or this manifests earlier or later?
Yes. So I was finding out that the cult wasn't real and I was losing my faith in the Mormon church around the time that I was maybe 5 years into my marriage. So when my marriage was really bad and abusive, I was also going through an eating disorder. And I was also, because of that perfectionism that came from how I grew up, was in burnout at my job because I was working 90-hour weeks. So all of it was happening at the same time. And it was really awful, to the point where I very seriously considered that it wasn't worth living if this was what life was going to be like.
And what was the job?
So I was a health coach, and I was very successful in it. So I started training other health coaches. So I was coaching clients myself while I had an eating disorder. So there was so much imposter syndrome of, I'm teaching people how to be healthy, but I am completely out of control with food and binge eating and starving myself and trying to keep it a secret. And I was training over 400 other health coaches in their journeys and them building their businesses. And it just kept growing. So it's oftentimes interesting to see that for some of us from the outside, we look the most successful when we're the most miserable inside. Because when we're miserable, it manifests in, I'll just work harder and I'll just do more.
Try to thread the needle on this one, but I'm sure there were some benefits to the cult experience that might have helped in the persuasion and influence of your success in the health industry, health coaching.
That is a totally fair question. I'm glad you're bringing that up. So it's very interesting to see, on the other side of this, fully deprogrammed from being in a cult, to see how so much of what happens in the corporate world, in influence, in so much of what we think are, regular everyday things, advertising, marketing, corporations, that it is very tied to the same that happen in a cult. So for instance, I was taught in a cult that there is one right way. There is one right way to be, there is one right way to believe, and everyone else who disagrees is just simply wrong. And everyone should convert to the right way of doing things. And it feels very safe and it feels very charismatic for a lot of people. So I still had these mentalities, even though I was finding the truth. But what happened is I was part of the problem, and I was part of the diet industry that caused my eating disorder. When I was part of that, I was still in the mentality of, there is one right way to eat and there is one right way to be healthy. And all you have to do is perfectly conform to that thing, and you don't have to think for yourself, and you can be whatever weight you want to be. So I realize now, looking back, that absolutely that mentality of one right way is what a lot of people look to for comfort, and was very much part of how I was teaching people how to build their health coaching weight loss businesses, which is absolutely not okay. And that was where I was at the time. And part of our stories is admitting when we were wrong and fixing it at a deep level.
At what point does your dad come back into the picture?
Yeah, that is one of the most beautiful parts of my whole life, is when I met my dad, because I realized that this wasn't true. The story that I'd grown up with, and I had been told that my father was the leader of this satanic cult, and that if I ever got in contact with my father, that he would instantly kill me, or worse. So once I realized the story wasn't true, it took me quite a while to have my nervous system catch up to feeling safe enough to reach out to this person that hadn't been chasing me to kill me my whole life. The reality is he kept on showing up and trying to get back in contact because he was looking for his children for 25 years that had been kidnapped away from him when I was like 2 years old. So I realized that there's no reason for me to fear my dad. And I had my nervous system catch up to that. I, did the same principles that we now teach to get to that place where I could do what was aligned with what was authentic in my own life. And Aaron, I chose to reach out to my dad. And I found an old email and I sent him one email, and he wrote back with, "This is the best day of my life. Is this truly my daughter that I've been looking for 25 years?" And even though intellectually I knew that I was okay, there was still that feeling of fear I was working through. But I knew now how to choose what my higher self, my higher brain, aligned with my goals, wanted to do, which was, I want to meet my dad. I want to know who I came from. And he just lived about 5 hours away from me, which was incredible. He had just moved back to the United States months before I reached out to him. And we drove to meet in a random Starbucks in Asheville, North Carolina. And I remember going down the road and seeing the trees through the car window and hearing the sounds my daughter was making in the car seat and the back seat, and just soaking it all in, because viscerally, I just knew this was the last day I was going to be alive. I truly felt like I was going to die driving toward my dad. And then I walked into the Starbucks and I saw an old Chinese man sitting there, and he turned around and I saw my own face in his. I saw someone that looked like me for the first time in my life. And all of that fear just instantly disappeared. And we ran to each other and we cried and we hugged. And I found out that I had a little sister that I didn't know about. And she was the same age as my daughter, and they've been best friends ever since. And my dad took out this old crumpled picture from his wallet that was just worn and, hardly, even stable at all, because you could tell it was just so well worn. And it was a picture of my brother and I as babies. And my dad's new wife said he has looked at this every single day. He's looked at this picture for 25 years, every single day. And my dad is an incredible human being that never gave up looking for his kids.
That's so wonderful. I bet it was awkward to ask him, "Dad, are you or are you not, in fact, the Lord of the Underworld?"
I asked him those questions, maybe not in quite those words, but yeah, it was a wild conversation for sure. But I was on a quest for truth.
Mm-hmm. But that's so great that you got to finally reconnect with your dad. That's wonderful. And just the racking up the crimes against humanity pulled on you, your brother, the risk of this cult. Was it, reaching back just a little bit, was it just your brother and you? How big was this cult?
So my brother and I were the subjects of this story that my mother created. So the Satan worshipers, I had been told, had hurt my brother and I. But the people who believed this story, I don't know exactly how big it was, probably hundreds, because my grandmother had this huge network of people that she was constantly updating. So it was like a single family cult, as in the people who lived it and feared it day to day. But then there was this next layer of all these people that were following the story, going without food and water to try to enlist the power of God to keep my brother and I from being kidnapped and killed. And to this day, people still believe this. I have reached out to people that I was still in contact with that I knew had been told this story when I found out it was a lie. And I have tried to reach out and tell people the truth. And the people that were my grandmother's friends, they just said things like, "Well, your grandmother is one of the best people that I've ever met. I don't think she would have ever lied about anything." And they still believe it. So there are so many people that still believe this story.
Wow. That's a shame. That's really awful. I mean, there's no other, I don't have it in my vocabulary, how sad that really is. But let's get back to your journey. And you're realizing or realize that you're in an unhealthy relationship with your husband. You do get divorced about 8 years in, and you've reconnected with your long lost family, your dad. How about dealing with the eating disorder? How did that come to fruition?
Yes. Now, this is a great question because this is the whole hinge point of why my story is a happy story and not a tragic story. And even growing up in a cult with all of the abuse, being in an abusive marriage, all the things that I dealt with growing up, nothing was as painful as my eating disorder because I felt totally out of control. It was an everyday battle. I would wake up in the morning and I would not know if I would binge eat that day or not. And it was a cause of so much misery and self-hate. And especially growing up feeling like control was so important and to monitor all of my actions and thoughts and deeds. And then to have this insane problem where I didn't know what I was going to do was absolutely terrifying. And it is what I am so grateful for now because my eating disorder got so bad and I tried everything to fix it over years, every single conventional method of how to end an eating disorder, all of the fringe stuff, because there are thousands of ways that people say you should deal with an eating disorder. All of them made it worse. And I was giving up hope. And I was collapsed one day on my closet floor, just sobbing and thinking that it doesn't make sense to keep living if this is how life is going to be. And in that point of really surrendering and giving up and seeing that nothing had worked for years, I had an idea. If I maybe wasn't going to live anyway, I had this idea of, well, what might work that I haven't tried if I'm not looking to some outside source, if I'm getting in touch with what might work if I found something myself. And I remembered, Aaron, the way that I had left the cult and fully been free of that story and no longer experienced that fear was a set of neuroscience principles that I had created out of survival and put together, and it worked to fully be free of deprogramming from the cult I grew up in. And I thought to myself, what if I could deprogram from an eating disorder like I deprogrammed from a cult? And Aaron, in 1 week, I was completely free from my eating disorder. I have been ever since. I haven't had the urge to binge. It's not something I've gone back to or relapse, like full freedom. And we went on to free over 1,000 other women from their eating disorders with the same principles. So the darkest parts of our stories can become the most triumphant and wonderful contributions in our life because I was very motivated to find an answer and I already had one. I just hadn't thought of putting those principles together until that dark moment.
That's pretty impressive. 1 week. Was this just like a clinical recognition of habits, triggers, that kind of thing? I love neuroscience. Yeah, the neurochemical reactions to our bodies from our own thoughts, and I'm a Huberman geek. So I'm curious, without giving away all the secrets. What were some of these things that you recognized, and how would you deal with that?
Great question. And it's simple and it's very powerful. And I'm happy to share because these are life-changing principles. And it's not only eating disorders, it's getting out of burnout, it's getting out of, like limiting beliefs. It's incredibly versatile as well. So how it works is most of the time we try to change our actions, which makes sense, right? Our actions lead to creating our life and the results and outcomes that we have in life. So we try to change our actions. And the reason that so many of us will try to change a habit, but then go back to how we did things before. We're constantly starting a diet on, New Year's Day. We're trying to, do something healthier. We're trying to change our communication. And it's this back and forth, is because it's always going to be an uphill battle and a lot of resistance if we try to focus on changing our actions. What actually works way, way better, and this is the foundation of what we teach, is you want to look at the thought patterns that are driving those actions. So you're going upstream to see what thought patterns drive what you're actually doing. So for instance, with an eating disorder, trying to not binge I tried that for years. It only got worse. But when you look at the thought patterns that lead up to the binge and you treat them like a habit, like I have a habit of thought and I'm going to break this habit of thought, then the desire to do the action that no longer serves you just melts away. And the key is to be able to highlight those thoughts in a way that your brain can see them and change them. Because habits are driven by our lower brain, which oftentimes is invisible. It's our subconscious. It's like we don't know what's happening. But when we can see those thought patterns from our higher brain, our prefrontal cortex, we can doubt them and we can change those patterns and we can break habits and patterns that don't serve us permanently when we do that. So that's the nerding out neuroscience piece of it, but that is really the key.
Well, like the adage, sunlight is the best disinfectant. You shine a light on what the trigger is, and you can make the behavior work in your favor. Can you help an overeating chocoholic with a running problem?
Absolutely. Yes.
That's a great segue to get into a word from our sponsors, Extraordinary Delights. Buy your fudge at eordfudge.com. Sorry. Anyways.
This is great. What is fantastic is that when you know how to work with your own brain, the problem doesn't matter so much, because whatever the problem is that isn't serving us, whether it's running or chocolate or a short fuse or procrastination or burnout, you just see what the problem is. But the key is to look at the habits of thought that are driving that. So it can literally be whatever we have that feeling of like, oh, why did I do that again? That's because you have a thought pattern that is overriding what conscious choice you would want to make. So you change the thought pattern and then you match a new thought pattern with your goal and what you want to do. So you can also include, like you can deprogram and you can also intentionally reprogram the thought patterns that drive your healthiest, highest self behaviors.
What is your desire now? What's the vision for the future for you? What are you trying to, how are you trying to make an impact today?
Yes, we believe that every problem that we deal with as in the world, like that we're dealing with personally, that we're dealing on a big level, is at its root so often the missing influence of women. We have an imbalance in our decision-making and our leadership and the structures that we look to. And so the She Center is what we created to, like, a better world for women is a better world for everyone. And that's really what we focus on. So we have personally coached over 9,000 clients since 2010 in changing these patterns, from executive coaching and training with the US Army to, moms and entrepreneurs, like whoever wants to rewrite their story and create a better life, like that's what we do. So our vision, Erin, is to have these principles expanded and available to so many more people. We have an app coming out soon that our first goal is to have 500 incredible people that want to rewrite their stories on that app. And we're going to have these principles and free content and courses and wonderful ways to up level and for people to really get in touch with these principles. because 9,000 people is a lot of people, and we're proud of that and we celebrate that. And it's just scratching the surface of how many people's lives could change if they knew how to work with their own brain in a more empowered way. So that's our vision, is really build community and bring people together who want to rewrite their stories.
That's great. And tell me about the book.
Yes. So we have a book called The Centered Leader, which is a leadership book, and that is out probably as of now. And then we have a double memoir called Split coming out, and might be out. It's very soon. So by the time you're hearing this, you might already have it available. And that is a double memoir of my story growing up in a cult and my dad's story of for 25 years searching for his kids. And it's written so beautifully in how our two stories come together. And I'm really proud of sharing the story, especially growing up being told that if I ever shared my story, that the Satan worshipers would come and murder me. So it feels very personally triumphant to be telling my story in a book.
Well, it's got to be a very powerful book. I can't wait to get my hands on a copy. I think that's a perfect time to segue into our countdown to impact. This is 3 books, 2 quotes, and 1 person who have all made an impact in your life.
Beautiful. So 3 books. I would say number 1, Michael Singer's he has so many great ones, but The Untethered Soul, I would say, is number 1. It's absolutely fantastic. Number 2, I would say, is Brene Brown's The Gifts of Imperfection. That is an incredible book to wake up in understanding our authenticity. That was a life-changing book for me. And third is a nerdy and super impactful book that I'm actually reading right now. And it's called When God Was a Woman. And it's a really interesting history of all of humanity and how our beliefs and our stories have evolved over time and how they influence us now. So yeah, those are all life-changing books, some from way past and some from like I'm in the middle of it right now.
Well, those are great selections. I think it was Brene Brown that also wrote Rise and Shine. I think that's one of my wife's favorite book.
Oh, beautiful. I love that. Yeah, that doesn't ring a bell specifically, but she has written like Atlas of the Heart is one of her newer ones about emotions. That one's really good. She's awesome.
Well, those are great. We'll put those in the show notes. How about 2 quotes and 1 person?
Yes. So the 2 quotes, let's see. I want to quote them correctly. So
don't worry, I never get my quotes right, even if I'm reading them.
All right. Well, I might give you just sort of the idea of the quote, but there's a quote about that a ship in harbor is safe, but that's not what ships were meant for. And I think that's a beautiful idea about really getting into what we're meant to do in the world. And it's probably not going to be from a place of safety. It's going to be from a place of, like I'm getting outside of my comfort zone because that's where all the good stuff is. And Louisa May Alcott, said something along those lines. Like I'm learning how to sail my ship, so I'm not afraid of storms. And then I love Maya Angelou. Success is liking yourself, liking what you do, and liking how you do it, and just that full, beautiful integrity of this is how I want to live, and this is what feels good to me.
Terrific. And 1 person. It doesn't have to be your favorite. I know people hem and haw about this. Just 1 person's made an impact on your life.
Yes. I would say I had a best friend for many years. And she came from a cult background as well. We were both raised in cults, and she was the first person that I'd ever met besides myself that had been raised in a cult. And she had such a fierceness for her worth as a woman and the power of her voice and her influence that defied so much how she'd been taught to grow up. And she had such an incredible humor, like so witty and so smart. And she never got her high school education, like, you know, because of her cult background. It was very much like, you don't need to learn math. Like the thing is going to happen where God takes us all up to heaven. So like, you don't need to learn anything. So that was her cult upbringing. But I really feel like the way that we defy our stories that we've grown up with, and how we can have such strength from our own selves and not because of a world's credential or how we're seen, I think is really powerful.
Just thinking, do you compare scars like military guys? Like, oh yeah, well my cult did this. Oh yeah, well I had to do this when I was a kid.
You know, actually, yes. And because she was someone, I think, like you and I, Aaron, that loves to make light of and joke and just, you know, about dark things, but it's like, yeah, this is real. So I remember when I first, because I didn't used to share my story with anyone, when I first shared my story with her about growing up in a cult, and her immediate reaction was she bursted out into laughter. And she's like, I have never been so grateful in my life that all of the bad things that happened to me really happened to me, because all of my stuff was a complete made up story. So it was just this beautiful connection of like, high five cult babies, you know, it's just a beautiful reaction. And I think a wonderful key to healing is being able to look at the hard things that have happened and make a joke every once in a while, or see the lesson and celebrate that life is really weird and we get to make choices and make of our circumstances what we choose.
I just read a book recently. It was, I was thinking, there's a cult that didn't believe in doctors or medicine at all, and then they also believed, you know, they would live among rattlesnakes, and if they got bit, it was God's will. I'm the only one left.
Yep. Well, you know, our beliefs lead somewhere.
Well, anyways, Lydia, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you sharing your time. Thank you for sharing all of the difficulties, or at least the big ones that you've been through with the Disruptor Nation, and I wish you all the best.
Oh, thank you. What a fantastic conversation, and so appreciate you sharing your story and bringing these stories to light, Aaron.
Thank you, and have a fantastic day.
You too.